Our mission at the Women's Museum of California is to share the inspiring stories of women past and present, the trailblazers in history and of today, with the goal of making life better for all women. Today's webinar is about The Eighth. It is a 2020 documentary about Ireland's campaign to overturn its near ban on abortion. And some background, back in 1983, the people of Ireland voted to add the Eighth Amendment to their constitution, giving the unborn an equal right to life to that of its mother. Abortion rights activists have been fighting to overturn that ever since, and The Eighth is a documentary about that successful campaign.
Every now and then an issue comes before us which challenges us to think about our history. Whether it's the damp cold of the Magdalen laundries or the sundered silence of mother and baby homes being broken. All of these things are connected by the way we as a country have treated women, and particularly pregnant women.
Women's health is at risk, women are still in danger, women are still taking the abortion pill illegally. We absolutely have to do something.
Investigation is underway into the death of Savita Halappanavar.
This government needs to introduce emergency legislation to protect women's lives. And if they don't, we will bring this government down.
Repealed! After decades of uncertainty, the process has started that could herald the biggest change ever in Ireland's law on abortion.
Our choice! Our choice!
This was the most divisive issue in Ireland ever.
The answer is just get rid of it, instead of, what do you need?
Suddenly, what's being proposed is a completely unrestricted liberal abortion regime. That's the shock factor.
Not the church, not the state!
It's murder! Can you not see it's murder?
Whilst we're voting on reproductive health care and abortion rights, it's actually about the value that we're putting on women in Irish society, saying that we do value them, we do trust them.
It's only women who are not trusted to make decisions about their own healthcare. Men aren't asked ridiculous questions.
Imagine if you could get this army of women putting that pressure on and to feel empowered.
Just for 1 week to do it. We've waited 35 years and we're going to bring it home.
It really is a remarkable film. I got a chance to watch it last night, and here, live from Ireland and New York, are the remarkable women who made this film possible, along with the San Diego reproductive rights attorney. And by the way, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Sandra Moss. I am a board member with the Women's Museum of California, and I also produce the Trailblazing Women series for the museum. Let's give these proper introductions to our guest today. Aideen Kane is a director. Give us a little wave there, Aideen, so we know which box you are. Director and producer of The Eighth. She is vice president of production at Fork Films and currently a producer on feature documentaries, Women in Blue and Inequality. Previous credits include Emmy-winning and nominated feature-length and TV documentaries, including The Armor of Light, The Trials of Spring, The Awful Truth, Face to Face, The Chappelle Twins, and Voices of the Children. In Ireland, she produced several award-winning documentaries for public television and is a producer on the international theatrical hit, Alone It Stands. Also here today, the star of The Eighth documentary, Alva Smith is a longtime activist and campaigner on feminist, LGBTI+ and socialist issues. She was the founding head of women's studies at University College Dublin and has written about feminism, politics, and culture in Ireland. She's been fighting for women's rights to choose for over 35 years, was co-director of the Together for Yes national referendum campaign, which removed the near total ban on abortion from the Irish Constitution. in 2018, and in 2019 was included in Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People list. Thank you for being here, and good evening in Dublin, right?
Hello to you.
Also here today is Tracy Skaddan. She is an attorney in San Diego and a trained litigator, currently serving as general counsel to Planned Parenthood of the Pacific Southwest. Tracy is an accomplished leader in advocating for reproductive health care services with more than 20 years of experience. Ladies, thank you so much for being here today and taking time to share with us your stories and your expertise. First question goes to Aideen, the director. Let me ask you, abortion, as it's been pointed out in your documentary, is the most culturally divisive issue ever in Ireland. What made you tackle the subject, go there, and go all in on this documentary?
Thanks, Sandra, and thanks very much to the Women's Film Festival at San Diego. We're really delighted to be here. We three of us made this film. I made this film with my co-directors and co-producers, Maeve O'Boyle and Lucy Kennedy. And we got together in about 2016. I'd known Maeve for a long time, and she had been talking about making a film on abortion. And then we met Lucy, and we decided we would tackle it together. It was an enormous subject. It was an enormous undertaking. We'd all grown up in Ireland under the Eighth Amendment. I was a teenager when it was introduced in 1983, and it was just such a defining moment of all of our lives, I think. And then for the following up to 30 years, I had traveled to London for an abortion when I was 25. So I had been directly impacted, but I hadn't spoken about it very much. And when I got together with Maeve and Lucy, I had a preteen daughter, my mother had just died, and I was living in New York, and I began to think about my own silence and my own lack of contribution to the debate. And you could tell things were happening in Ireland. There'd been a couple of very key court cases at the European Court of Human Rights. And so a lot of attention was being brought to Ireland. And we decided, we were filmmakers, we were Irish women, we knew change had to come. There was a lot of change in Ireland, and we wanted to tell this story. We knew it would be a really important moment in Irish women's history.
And you connected with Alva Smith. Alva, I'll let you explain how that connection happened, but tell us about yourself. I know that you are a mother, you're a grandmother, but what was your life like before your activism, and what created the spark in you to galvanize so many people to make the change?
Well, it's so long ago, Sandra, that I've sort of forgotten what life before activism was like. I'm not sure that there ever was that moment. I was always a very obstreperous, rebellious child. But I do know that as a young woman growing up in Ireland, and this would probably have been true in so many other countries too, because these issues are not divisive just in Ireland, they're everywhere. I encountered so many obstacles and obstructions simply to my path through the world. I couldn't do the things that I wanted and needed to be able to do as a young woman, the first girl in my family to go to university, that I began asking questions and, pushing, trying to push at doors. I got married and it didn't last very long, but you couldn't get a divorce in Ireland. And then I had my daughter by another man who didn't actually even live in Ireland, and she was considered illegitimate, but actually really not, because I was still technically married, and so on and so forth. And all of these problems came up and got in the way of what I thought women should be able to do. And I was becoming very frustrated and was quite ill. And then very fortunately, the big salvation for my life came along, which was, of course, the women's liberation movement. And I just jumped on that wagon. As soon as I saw it coming at me, I thought, right, this is where I need to be, because we can only change things when we work together, when we work together with other people. We can only change things when we have an analysis. And I was an academic. I was well placed to be part of that vanguard that was doing the analysing and the researching. And very quickly in Ireland, of course, I came up immediately. We didn't have contraception when I was a young woman. And therefore, everybody, whether you had to have an abortion or not and go to England for it, You had that money in your back pocket, or you didn't have it, but you knew where you could get the money to go to England if you were lucky. And so many women, of course, didn't have that opportunity. So we knew that we would need to tackle it. And unfortunately, right-wing forces, extreme right-wing forces, as you are so familiar with in the US, under the aegis of the Catholic Church, in our case, got there first and put the squeeze on government to hold a referendum to ban abortion completely. And from then on, that was in 1983. I mean, we've had something like six referendums on it. It has been, fight all the way. But I would say, people say to me, oh, that's your life's work. And I say, well, no, it's a lot of other things in my life too. I've been fighting for LGBT issues, against violence against women, for fundamental equality, tackling class issues. And now we are actually beginning to recognize the importance of tackling the huge racist discrimination and ethnic discrimination that we have in Ireland. So it's been busy, and it still is.
It certainly has. And as we listen to your story and your background, Tracy, this question for you as your involvement with Planned Parenthood. She really, Alva was such a figurehead and such a leader in the movement that happened in Ireland. Do we have that person in the United States today?
I think we have many of those persons, but we need to have people watch this film to see really the hard work that Alva and the team around her did. We are in a state in the United States now where, when I was watching the film, it really impacted me, and I'm in the weeds of what's going on right now, that we are going so backwards. We are so far behind what Ireland is doing. But I so agree with Alva and her movement, is that you need a team of people, not just women. You need a team of people. And what I can say about what's going on in our country right now is that women and men of all ages are speaking up. And this war against women will never be over. Despite the barriers that have constantly been put in place, it's not going to be over until we are ahead.
As a filmmaker, Aideen, I know you've been honored and awarded for many of your productions, but what made this film, this documentary, different from other things that you have done?
Well, it was very personal for me, and I think it was an opportunity, I suppose, we wanted to fully document everything in Ireland. So we gave equal opportunity to both sides of the debate and the campaigners on both sides to be involved. And I think this film was going to tell a history of it's interesting. One of the first people, when we wrote our first proposal for funding, somebody who was helping us said, oh, this is about the history of women's rights. We're like, no, it's about the abortion referendum. But ultimately, it did turn out to be about the legacy and the history of how vulnerable people and women and children had been treated in Ireland. And then it also told the story, or we hope that it tells a story of the transformation on many levels of a country and how far we had come from 1983 to even how the debate and how the whole referendum played out in 2018. So there was three strands to the story. There was the history, so that it was the context. We hoped this would be watched by an international audience, because even though it's very specifically an Irish story, we did feel like it was a cautionary tale at the time, even for the US, because those restrictions have been happening in the US for a very long time, despite the fact that abortion is legal. Access has been rolled back for a long time. So it was a massive story that we wanted to tell. As Irish women, we felt we were well placed to tell it. As Irish women working in America and in Ireland, we hoped we'd bring the international audience to it. And yeah, it was it was a big story though. We had to tell the history, we had to tell the campaign, and then obviously we wanted people to really connect with Alva and Andrea Horan, and as part of the teams that were driving this forward, to understand the enormous grassroots movement that happened in a campaign like this.
And Alva, what do you think was the key to the success of your grassroots campaign?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would say, you know, that we have fantastic women leaders in Ireland, and I was one among many, in fact. And I think that's really important because we did actually manage, not without difficulty, but we did manage to work together as leaders. And I think that that doesn't always happen, and you have to work on it. And I really believe that what stood us in incredibly good stead in Ireland was that in 2012, after the tragic death of the young Indian woman, Savita Halappanavar, who died when she was refused an abortion because a heartbeat was detected when she was spontaneously miscarrying anyway. And of course, the resonances for all of you in the US are so powerful there. At that moment, we said, this is the time, we have to seize this time. People are outraged. So young people were outraged, but older people were outraged. And we started to organize in 2012. So we didn't have the referendum, in fact, until 2018. And people say, oh, you only had 3 months. Didn't you do incredibly well for 3 months? I say, excuse me, we were organising from 2012. And in fact, quite a number of us go way back to 1983. So we were bringing all of that into the campaign. And, you know, as Tracy was saying, we spread it. We deliberately went out in an organisation I set up with another woman, Sinead Kennedy, called the Coalition to Repeal the Eighth Amendment, to build a very, very broad coalition, trades unions, students, young people, all kinds of NGOs, human rights, as many medical people as we could possibly get on board, and so on, and so, as well as the pro-choice and feminist groups, because we could not win that on our own. There was no way. We had to make it into an issue which was seen as being vital for women and girls and pregnant people, of course, but that also mattered to everybody in the country. It was about the kind of society we were. Were we really egalitarian? Did women really matter? Were we going to put our money where our mouths were? We said we were committed to equality. Therefore, why did we not give women and ensure that women had full equality and autonomy and so on and so forth? So we had to really work hard and craft messaging that moved us away from the narratives, the traditional narratives around abortion, and which you can see to some extent in the film, I think.
Yes, a key moment in the campaign strategy was to shift the messaging to become softer, focusing more on care and compassion and change. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, yes. I mean, yes, absolutely, Sandra, except that people see that as softer. But in fact, our strategy, because we were aiming for a referendum to get government to hold a referendum, which we wanted to win, was to talk directly to the voters, the people who are sovereign in a referendum campaign. And they were not prepared to listen to radical accounts of abortion. And indeed, that turned out to be true, whether it was pro or anti. These were people who, the vast majority of people who weren't directly affected by the issue were, you know, not necessarily for or against. They didn't necessarily know what exactly they thought, but they had been raised and educated to see abortion as murder. So we knew that there was no point in going in with all our flags flying and our messages blazing, that we had to go in and say to those people, what are you worrying about? What are your fears? Do you think the sky is going to fall in? Which indeed many of them did. And to give them reassurance, to help them to reframe abortion and to see it as something which was very necessary for women in terms of our health and well-being in the very broad sense of that term. So socially, economically, culturally, as well as in strict physical and mental health terms. And we did have criticism from within our own broader pro-choice movement for that messaging, but I can only say that we stuck to our strategic aim of reaching the voters, and it was hugely successful. The vote that we got in the end was over 2/3, was I think 66.4% or something of the vote, which was huge. And it was actually 2 percentage points more than what we had got for equal marriage for lesbian and gay people that I was also involved in 2015. So, and we had learned lessons from them as well, that you have to focus. You've got to focus on the audience you want to convince. You don't set out to convince your own side. That's stupid. And you don't need to, or you shouldn't need to. And you can't convince, you cannot, we could not have convinced the 20% of people in Ireland who are viscerally opposed to abortion. It would have been deeply disrespectful, actually, even to try. They were as committed on their side as we were on ours. So it is about shifting the people who are there between those two poles.
Let me ask you, Tracy, listening to what Alva just said, and in light of the fact that it's been 3 weeks since the state of Texas passed the most extreme abortion ban in US history, what lessons are to be learned from the strategies, the campaign that Alva so successfully headed up?
Well, I think that there are some similarities that we need to look at as a country and coalition and team building. But the difference is that United States actually provides under the Constitution, under Roe versus Wade and subsequent cases that were upheld by the Supreme Court, that abortion is a legal right. And so you are supposed to be able to have a right to have a safe and legal abortion in our country. What we've seen over the years is that being chipped away over and over again by the Supreme Court, which allows states to provide their own restrictions, such as parental consent requirements and ultrasound requirements and certain really misinformation, medically inaccurate information to be shared, attempts to criminalize people who either get an abortion or provide an abortion. And what we've seen is lack of access to abortion, mostly affecting people of color and disabilities and living in rural areas where they already have barriers to getting good health care to begin with. And although most people in the United States do believe that Roe versus Wade should not be overturned, we're headed into a direction because of first off, a case coming right now. It's being heard on December 1 with the Supreme Court, Dobbs. This is the Mississippi 15-week ban case. And if you look at the facts of the case and you look at the constitutionality of our precedents, that should be unconstitutional. Clearly, SB 8, the case in Texas, the law in Texas that you referred to, which has been enacted since September 1, which essentially bans abortion in the state of Texas, because it bans abortion around 6 weeks when women don't even know they're pregnant. So we've seen the impacts already in Texas. Women are scared, they are confused, they don't know where to go. And it's having a huge impact already. And we've seen this before when laws have been put in place temporarily and then blocked. This is the law that has been enacted. And although there are challenges both in federal court and in state courts right now, so there's all this political side, and then there's all of the legal aspects of deciding what should happen to our right to have an abortion or not in the United States. Planned Parenthood certainly takes the position that women need to be trusted, and we trust women to make decisions about their lives and their bodies. It should not be the legislature, it should not be a governor, and it should not be a Supreme Court because of the certain makeup of the Supreme Court to now overturn or even push that even further back into a time before women had the right to have an abortion in a safe and legal way. We know what happens in that time, which is exactly why you all did that film, and you did the work you did, Alva and her team, to make sure that women had the right they deserve.
And Aideen, as the director and producer of this film, and a very personal connection, as you shared with us, I'm curious, what people are so reluctant to use the word abortion. They're nervous about that word. They try to, reproductive rights is just so much more palatable. How has your view of things changed? And after doing this film, what is it that we can do to, I guess, just make it more of an authentic discussion?
Well, I think one of the key things we saw in the campaign in Ireland, and we're seeing here in the States, is centering the voices of the communities and the people that are affected by the laws, and elevating those voices and lifting up. Now, a film can only tell so much. It's only 90 minutes, so we had to make hard decisions about how much we could share about what we saw happening in Ireland. But I think women telling stories, breaking, for us in Ireland, it was the silence, it was the stigma, it was the shame, it was breaking through that. There's a piece in the film where we do this chorus of voices, and that was only a tiny selection of the many women and stories and circumstances and reasons for abortion that people had shared for us. But the use of the language, Alva will speak to that a little bit, because they went deep on that as part of their strategy. But even for myself, I used to say for 20 years termination. I never said abortion. And then when we started filming in Ireland, everybody was using the term travel, women who traveled. So it meant you traveled for an abortion. I was like, you traveled, you know. And so then we started to use it. So language is critical, and it's really important. If you even look at the terms pro-life, we're all pro-life. And but language in a campaign becomes even more important. And Alva, I'll throw that over to you to talk a little bit about that.
Well, yes, I mean, I do. I think, no, I'm not on mute. I think, yes, of course, language is really important. But the interesting thing was that we did, to pick up on Sandra's earlier word, we were very moderate in the language we used in the actual referendum campaigning. For a long time, we talked about decision rather than choice. And I remember towards the very end of the campaign, I was canvassing a woman who's probably about my own age. And I said, well, you know, it's about enabling a woman to make her own decisions. And she looked me straight in the eye and she said, do you mean like choice? And I said, yes, I do. And she said, well, you're pro-choice. I said, yes, I am. So am I, she said. And it showed us really that people did actually travel that journey. But I mean, if I could just come back to, you know, the points that you were making about women's voices and the stories, that was hugely important for us, because that was about breaking the stigma. That was about women saying, all kinds of different women. I think our stories were themselves quite moderate. But I think what so many organizations have been doing with you in the States is all kinds of women and pregnant people speaking up and saying, I had an abortion and it was for this, that, and the other reason. And I should never have to tell you the reason anyway, because it's my body. Which in a way brings us back to the problem that you in the States have a constitutional clause in your constitution which should indeed ensure that women have a right to abortion and they can actually get it. But that clause in itself is not strong enough because fundamentally it is, as I understand it, about a right to privacy. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg always said it should really have been about equality. And I would dare to go further than the great Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You know, how insolent can you become? And of course, I don't mean it in that way. But there is a very strong part of me. We don't have anything in our constitution now. I think that what we need to be looking at or thinking about is inscribing in constitutions where we have them the right to bodily integrity. Because until such time as we actually say this is a right, women and very many other vulnerable groups of people will not actually be able to exercise that right to the extent that they should. And I do think that it's, again, I'll venture an opinion. I think it is time for that really to be grasped in the US. You're not going to get anywhere with the current Supreme Court anyway, so you might as well go for broke and go for it and get the feet out on the street. No politicians like marching feet. They really don't. So we will be supporting you all next Saturday. We won't be marching in Washington, but we will be marching in Dublin to support women and pregnant people in Texas and all over the US, and to be with you in spirit, because we actually, a very strong feature of our movement in our very tiny country as compared with your enormous country was that mobilizing people, activating them on social media, yes, but then getting them to go out into the real world and to demonstrate this was tremendous education for the population as a whole, and it terrified the politicians.
Tracy, talk about that. What's happening in San Diego? How can women and men get involved in this march?
So yes, there is a march, and I don't actually have many details about it, Sandra. I'm sorry, but I'm sure it can be found. One of the things about California is that we have in our state constitution a right to pre-viability abortions. Mm-hmm. And so we're somewhat protected in California, except that even in California, abortion access is out of reach for many because of the systemic inequities with healthcare, with our healthcare system. We intend to, and we're doing some work in San Diego and our regions and the state of California and other states across the country, are trying to partner with organizations so that we can help women get out of Texas, for example, to get an abortion that they need. And women right now in Texas are crossing state lines to Louisiana and Oklahoma, for example, but they also have very hostile abortion restrictions. What we do know is that about 90% of women who need to get out of their state, because we may see this copycat laws in other states, we're expecting that. But what we know is that they're going to drive. They're not going to take, we have this big country that you mentioned, Alva, they're going to be able to drive if they can even do that. And driving hundreds of miles is a much larger, barrier for many women who will not have access. In sort of our everyday life, I think some call to actions is vote. You have to vote. Increase talk about abortion, as Aideen and Alva spoke about. We've had many opportunities. Women are speaking out. Women are outraged. And, donating is always important to causes and organizations that are helping with these causes. Write to your congressional members, your elected officials, even in friendly states, to ensure that we don't get complacent, because even in California, we always have to be on alert with our issues. Run for office, speak up, particularly about comprehensive sexual education. I think that we really need more comprehensive sexual education that provides medically accurate information, because there's so much misinformation out there. And because of all the misinformation out there, it's really important to retweet, reshare, whatever you do in social media. And I have to admit, I'm not one that's really on it, but I do know the importance and value of doing that so that the right information is in front of people.
Great point. Just more on the march. It starts at the waterfront in downtown San Diego at 10 a.m. on Saturday, October 2nd. And to your point, I'll throw this out to either Aideen or Alva. In the documentary, it is pointed out that the people of Ireland, they didn't trust the politicians, they didn't trust the church, they didn't trust women's organizations, but they did have a great trust in the medical profession. And in the end, you really did rely on the doctors to get the message to the voters. Isn't that correct, Alva? Did that make a difference? Was that an important part in the campaign?
It was, no, I would say it was an element in the campaign, but the really important message carriers were women themselves. And I think that was very, very clear. And we were lucky that we had some wonderful medics who did speak out. And it's a very conservative profession in Ireland, and I imagine elsewhere as well. And that they were prime spokespeople against abortion in previous campaigns, but it was very clear, and we said it in Together for Yes from the very beginning, that we were a feminist campaign, and that the main message carriers would be women who had that experience themselves. And of course, that in itself is a very difficult decision, because you're basically saying that in order to win a right, that women have to expose ourselves in ways that men don't. And we have to speak about very personal matters, which people don't generally speak so personally about, their intimate and indeed their health lives. But we did feel that it was important. And women themselves, there were so many women who spoke about a sense of catharsis, that it was a real lifting of a burden from their shoulders when they did speak out, but they were very brave. So no, I would say the doctors, we are hugely appreciative of their input, but it was carried by the women.
The women. You mentioned catharsis, and I think, Aideen, this film, the process must have been painful, exhilarating, but cathartic in the end, especially because the story is about you.
It is, and many Irish women, it was a privilege. It was absolute privilege to be around all of the campaigners on both sides, and to respectfully listen and hear and to what they had to say. And it was also a privilege to work with my two co-directors as three women. The process of making this film, I mean, as Alva said, everything in this campaign, in all of these campaigns, it's teamwork, and women work extraordinarily well together. So even three of us making the film was a very, it was absolutely super. But one of the things I wanted to add to the conversation is that one of the key things for me, after I'm not, an out there activist, I'm a filmmaker. I tell stories, and I tell stories about the world that I want to live in, or want my children to live in. But one of the things that's become really clear to me living here in the US with everything that's going on is that this is about healthcare, and reproductive healthcare is critical as part of healthcare for women, and for us to live with dignity, equality, and control over when we have families, how and if we have families. And I think that's hopefully will be part of the conversation here over the next year.
And Sandra, I'd like to piggyback on that, because you are exactly right. The problem is, in the United States, is that the healthcare of women has always been on a back burner, and particularly when it focuses on abortion, because abortion provides women an opportunity to choose how to live their life, to choose when to have a family or not to at all. And there's many reasons why women get pregnant or need to terminate or want to terminate a pregnancy. And it's that very large, unfortunately, group of politicians who get in the way of this in the United States. And to say that right now that SCOTUS is not political, we certainly know it is with the most recent 3 people who were put onto the Supreme Court, and where we might be headed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would definitely want to say that, for all, we won a very great victory, and it was a great victory, and of real material value to women, but also, of course, symbolic value in the country as a whole. At the same time, we have been out there since the day after the law was enacted, which was the 2nd of January 2019. We have been there fighting against restrictions in that law, and as I put in the chat here just a moment ago, against the non-application of the actual policy not being implemented. Only 11 of our 19 maternity hospitals offer a full abortion service. We still have about 300 or 400 women travelling to the UK every year out of, as compared with several thousand who did so before. These numbers seem small to you, but proportionately, we do still have a number of women travelling, and we therefore have to go on fighting to get beyond the problems with the law, which leads me to make the comment that, just as I was saying, I think we need our constitutional thinking to change in relation to abortion. So too do we need to recognise very fully that there should never be a need for a law regulating abortion. It's absolute nonsense. It's not about permitting abortion. These laws, wherever they are, even in the UK, where abortion is pretty widely, it's really available. At the same time, the law is awful. They are about limiting the extent to which women can actually access abortion. So we have to move away from the law. And as far as I understand it, Canada is about the only country in the world which doesn't either have a national law or a constitutional reference to abortion. And even there, of course, there are still problems. And that has to do with the everlastingness, unfortunately, of patriarchal control of women. So we're still looking at misogyny and patriarchal control. And I think, therefore, we really have to fight all of that when we're fighting to have access in the everyday to abortion.
So despite all of your hard work, there's so much more work to be done. You had such a huge victory in Ireland, and yet it's not over. It's really just started.
Yes, and in fact, picking up on the great points made by Aideen and Tracy there's another march. This is the marching season, I think, of I think it's the maternity rights march, because women have suffered, pregnant women have suffered during COVID, where their partners were not permitted to be with them during labour or to visit them or anything. And this has led to women standing up and saying, you treat us as if we simply didn't count. So there is now this genuinely burgeoning movement of women saying how we are treated in relation to reproduction, and also to our functions and our rights when we give birth and as mothers and as parents. And let's look at the housing situation where families can't find anywhere to live, and so on and so forth. There is a new kind of feminist analysis coming out there, which is really maybe not that new, but which is coming up to the surface again, which I think is very necessary and healthy, and which I'm sure you all are drawing on in the US, because I know you have to draw on absolutely everything you can, because it is so desperate. And as you say so rightly, Tracy, it is always the women who have least who suffer the most and who bear the brunt of these appalling laws and restrictions, always.
So many wonderful points made and so much important information. I will close out by letting each of you share your final thoughts with us. As a journalist, I'm curious to know what you think about the feminist movement today, and young women. Are they going to be more engaged than, say, women have been in the past? Is there a new energy that's happening among younger women, or is this a resurgence in older women, seasoned women? I hate the word older. You know what I mean. But I'll let you each have your final thoughts and message that you would like to share with today's audience. And you can go ahead. We'll start with you, Aideen.
Thanks, Sandra. I certainly witness all around me the energy, the strength, and the passion of this next generation of women. I have an 18-year-old daughter myself, and there's nothing I enjoy more than being around her and her friends. I think they're so bold in their demands, and they're unfettered maybe by us as an Irish woman growing up by the Catholic Church or the patriarchal society. They're so much more tolerant of each other and the choices that they make. So I have great faith in this next generation.
Tracy, final thoughts?
I very much agree. I think that what I've witnessed is perhaps a turn in that movement, because when it comes to abortion, a lot of the younger folks thought, of course we can get an abortion. Abortion's legal. And they were complacent or did not understand or weren't tapped in to what was going on repeatedly, decade after decade in our country. Now it's directly going to impact them because of where you might live. And I have a 17 and 19-year-old, 2 daughters, and I see the passion, Aideen, in not just this issue and understanding it, but in climate change, in voting rights, in all of these incredibly important areas, LGBTQ, where I've heard my own daughters say, wait, why is the government telling us to do that? So it is a movement, and it can be a very powerful movement. We need everyone from all ages, all genders, from all places to get on this collaboration to protect women's rights in general.
Thank you, Tracy. And Alva, you have the final word.
Well, I completely agree with that, Tracy. Personally, I am absolutely dazzled by young women. I think they're just totally wonderful, and they have such creative ways of thinking and doing things so much more quickly than we did. I think they're absolutely wonderful, but I also think that we have given them an awful lot to have to do. We're leaving them, the legacy that we're leaving is so enormous. I think about climate and environment. I think of all the young people who led the Black Lives Matter movements in the States, but also right across the world. There's so many issues that they're facing into now to try to create a genuinely equal world post-COVID. They're facing into a future of great uncertainty. And I do honestly think that intergenerational work is therefore really important, because hopefully we can give them a little bit of grounding and just simply support them and be with them in everything that they do. So I always like to say that I like a little shout out for older women. What's wrong with us?
Bravo, yes.
Older women, but the young women, you have my vote every time, all the time, forever.
Alva Smith, Aideen Kane, Tracy Skaddan, you all are sheroes, and I thank you so much for sharing your time with us. The Women's Museum of California, you can learn more about it on our website. It's womensmuseumca.org. Thank you so much for your time and for all that you do for women. And thank you to our audience for watching today.
Thank you for having us.
Sure thing. Thank you. Live from Dublin, New York, and San Diego. You can't beat that. Enjoy your rest of your day. Thank you.